Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll get started in a minute. I just wanted to introduce both the archive and the program. I'm Venkat, and I'm part of the team here at the archives at NCBS, which is a public center for the history of science in contemporary India. The Research Fellow program is one of the various activities of the archive, and it's been generously supported by the TNQ Foundation. And the research fellows who've worked with us, engaged with us through using of the archives, talking about their work, and many of the fellows are actually in this room. So thanks all for the work that all of you do. It's an open program, so if there are people that you know who you think are a good fit, please point them to the website. The link is there in the announcement that I think all of you would have received, due to which you're here. But if you can't find it, if you just look on the Join Us portion of the archives page, you should be able to find the link to the Scholars program. The next deadline is on July 31st, and we do look forward to more applications. I'm super delighted here to introduce Abhinav Tyagi, whose work has been in place here for the last 3 months, well, through Jan through March. And he's been looking at the MS Swaminathan papers, and he'll, of course, talk more about the revisit to the Green Revolution. Very quick note of introduction for Abhinav. Abhinav is a science historian and an STS scholar. He examines the social, historical, and structural factors that influence the development of various strands of biotechnology in the Indian subcontinent during the 20th century. He was a research fellow, as I said, at the archives between Jan and March of this year. And during this tenure, he focused on research within the archival papers of MS Swaminathan and Swaminathan's colleagues. He holds a PhD from IIT Bombay and a master's from IISc Mumbai. Abhinav's talk is titled Revisiting the Green Revolution, Statecraft of Cultivating Modernity. Abhinav, thanks so much for being here. Over to you.
Thanks, Venkat, for this polite introduction. Thank you all for taking your time from your schedule and making yourself available here. As you can see from a title, which intend to talk about revisiting the foundations of Green Revolution. Through this talk, I will be revisiting some of the institutional as well as the methodological precursors that laid the foundation of Green Revolution in this country. Instead of directly dwelling on the introduction of high yield variety of seeds in India, I will rather take a longer route, take a genealogical view, or methodological view, or say historical view towards the global and Indian scenario that led to the culmination of this agrarian change. So what were one of the major significant factors that contributed in impacting the global food security and causing the food crisis? Especially because the cutting of the food supplies, it led to the widespread incidence of famine and starvation, especially in the blockade area and occupied regions. Armed forces were prioritized over civilians for allocation of the food, and therefore new rules for rationing and to curb stocking. The rules for rationing were introduced. So you can see that the civilians were, queued up in a store, or you can see it in the visuals, like people are queuing up in the streets of in London or any part of the world. The Global Food Campaign is sort of an international movement, which is launched in various parts of the world as a response to this global food crisis. In Britain, the Global Food Campaign had a tagline for Dig for Victory, which tried to blend the nationalist and the agrarian image together. Like it's some sort of version of Jai Jawan Jai Kisan kind of image, blurring of the imagery. The mass campaign urged civilians to create take whatever open space available to them to create, whether it's to make kitchen gardens or make the playgrounds into parks, or playgrounds into vegetable plots. The state was publishing manuals, and through radio programs, the state was was training what are the know-hows of agriculture. US took it as an opportunity to export its agriculture surplus, and as well as take it as a opportunity to knowledge for knowledge transfer, especially through Rockefeller Foundation agriculture missions. In Singapore, very similar kind of visuals that you have seen in Britain. The all available open spaces were dug up to plant common crops such as vegetable, tapioca, and sweet potato, etc. You can see in the background, you can see the clock tower of Victoria Concert Hall, as well as the Singapore Municipal Building. In Sri Lanka, the Grow More Food campaign was utilized to expand the amount of cultivable land in. So these are some of the examples of Grow More Food campaign worldwide. In India, the magnitude of food crisis was far more worse because it was clubbed with some of the untimely disasters that happened, natural disasters. One is the Orissa cyclone in October 1942. The cyclone that emerged from the Bay of Bengal caused around 61,000 fatalities, and still considered as one of the top 10 deadliest cyclones emerging from Bay of Bengal. Before moving to Bengal famines, I have a trigger warning. Some of the images are really disturbing. The Bengal famines is considered as one of the most devastating famines of the century. You can see from the picture the human carcass lying unattended on the streets, scavenged by vultures and scavengers, which estimate to take lives of 2.1 million to 3 million people, and leaving around 10 million people affected by undernourishment and other ailments. However, starvation was the main reason for the death. Malaria, lack of health supports were identified as other main reasons for the deaths. You can see these are the visuals we might have seen, we might have observed during the pandemic. But imagine a pandemic without food. This kind of scenario we were in. The developmental economists like Amartya Sen identified the British war-related policy, which actually take the food from Bengal and supplied it into the war and use it to mitigate some of the food challenges in Britain, is one of the major reasons for Bengal famines. After the global embarrassment for the Bengal famines, in a jiffy, British government launched Grow More Food campaign in India in 1943. If you look at the banner, this is basically a poster of Grow More Food campaign. This has exactly the same script that they had in England. This is the role is played by the Indian actors. The irony is they had the same kind of script that make kitchen gardens, create agriculture plots in India, and that will rectify that situation. In 1947, it was again the Grow More Food campaign was again launched. The aim was to reclaim the land, improvise use of the improvised seeds, promote irrigation facilities, and the mechanization of the agriculture. So the idea was the state government was disbursing small amount of loans so that farmers can clear off their land, make it more cultivable for make it more cultivable. They were supplying seeds. The idea is through small aids, can we improve the yield of agriculture? But one of the criticisms of Grow More Food was there is a lack of regulatory mechanisms. In order to expand the cultivable land, Grow More Food actually led to massive amount of deforestation. In 1942, ICAR published a report called Assessment of Grow More Food Campaign. the report pointed out the methodological flaws in the campaign, especially for the assessment of the yield using yardstick method. These yardsticks are basically sort of thumb of rule, which are assumed or created based on the calculation made them available from the government model farms using under the by the agriculture experts. So these yardsticks are of that sort. If I give you example, that if the loan is given or aid is given for constructing a well, it assumes that it will improve the yield by 1 ton, or if 1 ton per hectare. If the aid is supplied for 1 ton of fertilizer, it will automatically replicate into the increase of yield of 2 ton of food. So it does not acknowledge the agroecological diversity in the country. To rectify these methodological issues, a committee for agriculture statistician was formed to oversee the survey design, evaluate the findings, recommend the new methodological refinement of assessment of the yield. They further stressed upon the collecting the farmer response to make it more reliable. So in the newer agriculture statistical paradigm, IC-STAR adopted sample survey model to estimate the food production increase. The field start collecting data from the acreage data from the farmer who were disbursed with these aids. They were also conducting the crop cutting experiments. The idea of crop cutting experiments was to compare the yield from those farms in which the yield, this aid is not given, and to compare the yield from the aided farms. And they further used randomized sample selection to avoid the bias. Some of the key findings were the seeds actually gave them the desirable results. However, fertilizer did not perform on the way it was expected, and combination of fertilizer was far more beneath the expectations. But the trials were important. But this method, the new statistical incorporating agricultural statics, was one of the first time first time there was a shift towards empirical field-based evaluation of the state agriculture program in independent India, and they function as as a methodological precursor to Green Revolution methodologies in 1960s. By incorporating modern planning with agriculture statistics, the Grow More Food campaign was laying the ground for Green Revolution statecraft. In the governance, data-driven policy was adopted, which marked a shift from assumption-based yardstick method to more evidence-based evaluation method in evaluating the yield. It exhibits the tendencies of technocratic statecraft, which reflects on early post-colonial India's aspiration to govern agriculture through modern science and agriculture statistics. It acknowledged the aspect of participatory verification, taking records from farmers about their yield, and cross-verifying the data to make it more reliable. One more thing it pointed out is the limitation of centralized planning, what we have seen, especially in the yardstick method. So in overall, I will reiterate that these are some of the precursors as a methodology in terms of governance, as well as in terms of methodology. And Grow More Food laid the institutional as well as the methodological groundwork for the later high yield-based Green Revolution. However, modern planning and statistical interventions were able to modernize the governance structure, but still challenges remain concerning the response from the crop for the high yield input agriculture. Because Indian varieties, traditional varieties, were were prone to fungal and bacterial infection. The major ones are black rust, brown rust, and blue rust. You can see in the picture the fungal infection can, the fungal infection on the leaves of the wheat varieties, which manifest as a form of a rust. See, the disease was actually the disease outbreak actually causing in normal year 10 to 20% of yield loss. But the problem is it can outbreak into an epidemic. And for example, one of the examples is in Bihar in 1956-57 pandemic, 1956-57 famine was basically caused by the yellow rust epidemic. The other major problem is a physiological problem with the traditional varieties, which were slightly longer had slightly taller. They can take the heights up to 1.2 meter to 1.4 meter, while in the high input agriculture scenarios, when exposed to a large amount of irrigation and fertilizer, the crop become top heavy, more resistant and exhibit weed resistance in the windy conditions. They are susceptible to mechanical collapse. So you can see as in the picture so that's why there's always sort of a ceiling regarding how much input we can give to the crops. There was no breakthrough in this direction until 1962. India was constantly seeking international collaborations in their crop breeding programs. So as I mentioned in the third slide, US looked at this as an opportunity through Cold War geopolitics and through Rockefeller Foundation missions. In 1957, the first collaboration with the Rockefeller Foundation, Ralph Cullingham arrived in India in 1957 and setting up All India coordinated maize improvement scheme. He made a suggestion that agriculture should adapt a multidisciplinary approach in which it should adapt methodologies from nuclear physics or biochemistry and mention that this is a model of crop improvement research worldwide. In this manner, the Rockefeller Foundation becomes a site for policy recommendation. They recommended that there should be restructuring of ICAR. It becomes the site for knowledge transfer. They were disbursing fellowships, supplying textbooks, farm material, laboratory equipment, as well as for site for the Cold War geopolitics. This was one of the most valuable collaboration in supplying India with the large amount of breeding material. In 1962, based on this collaboration, in 1962, a request was made to Rockefeller Foundation to supply a quantity of new variety of wheat, a dwarf variety, which has a Norman gene. A Norman gene, basically a Japanese dwarf variety, which is taken from Japan and moved to Mexico. In Mexico, they breeded. They developed a new dwarf varieties called, and there's a request was made for a visit of Norman Borlaug. Norman Borlaug is considered as the architect of Green Revolution worldwide, and he was conferred with Nobel Prize later for his contribution on Green Revolution. In 1964, at 55 locations all over India, Lima Rojo and Sonora 64. These are two dwarf varieties, there are actually 5 dwarf varieties supplied by CIMMYT Mexico, but these two were tested on 55 locations in Delhi, Ludhiana, Pune, and Kanpur, and recorded around 4 tons of yield per hectare. These dwarf varieties were further subjected for pathological, physiological, agronomic, and quality assessments. In 1965, Lima Rojo and Sonora 64 were released for general cultivation under a new standardized agronomic practice under the protocol of new standardized agronomic practice. This is a list of some of the field trials, how the first three, Lima Rojo, Sonora 64, B22, are the Mexican varieties, Sharbati Sonora, Kalyan Sonora, Sona, Sonalika, Choti Lima. These are the Indian varieties derived from the these three Mexican varieties. Under different pathological as well as physiological trials, they have exhibit good resistance, as well as most of the like Lima Rojo is one of the one which was used extensively in the early years of Green Revolution till 68, 69, and then Sharbati Sonora was the first commercially successful hybrid variety which was used in India in later part of the Green Revolution. This exceptionally high yield generated waves of excitement among the agriculture scientists, and I will use this opportunity to read some of the excerpts to give you a peek into what kind of emotions people had. There's an unpublished work of Professor M.S. Swaminathan called Punjab Miracle. I'll read some of the excerpts. One of the most significant indication of the quiet revolution that has been sweeping the countryside, appearing at this year Republic Day parade at Culture Tableau submitted by Punjab government that has its theme Wheat for the Nation. It is true that Punjab has always been fertile area and been a granary for India for ancient time. But the selection of the theme this year underlines the unprecedented leap forward that has been made in last 2 years in last 2 years. During 67, 68, the average yield of high yielding wheat varies from 67.3 quintal hectares in Ludhiana district, a figure approaching yield obtained in Netherlands, the country with the highest average of yield of wheat in the world. The average yield in the Punjab has increased over 50% in last 5 years. This is an explosion of quantity never seen or heard before in our country. An unremmed of change, hence must be termed as a miracle. What lies behind this miracle? So now he will give away some of the tricks of the miracle. The first solid foundation of careful scientific research and planning, mainly in the areas of breeding and selection of the varieties which respond well to the increasing supply of fertilizer and water, was laid during 1962 to 65. We have just discussed that part. During the varieties of wheat developed in Mexico formed the initial capital for such research. The dwarf varieties have been known in India for 5,000 years, but dwarfing itself does not lead to high yield. It only enables a farmer to apply more and more fertilizer and supply water whenever the plant needs it. Our earlier varieties will fall down, technically called as lodging, if fed with fertilizer or more water. That's why there is a ceiling of about 3.5 ton per hectare with regards to the yield, with regards to the yield potential. Second main factor of the success has been that of providing the right resource at right time, place and the technical know-how of using them in the right way. Too many rights in one sentence. In modern farming, it is not enough merely to have and to be willing to use large amount of fertilizer and water. Equally important is the qualitative aspect of their use. If the timing, doses, depth, distance, and so on are not right, such of the efforts and money will go in waste. So now he proposed, thus modern farming requires not only investment, but knowledge and skill, and unique method of transferring this know-how, method of transferring this know-how was devised in 1965. This was to ask the scientists who were developing the know-how to demonstrate it themselves to the farmers' field under national demonstration program. So you can sense, the sense of accomplishment, excitement, but also in later part, how he underplayed the role of high-yielding varieties and focused more on the process. So it's like to make a laboratory object work, what he says is the curation of the protocol is also equally important. So which he actually talks about in the second phase. And something which I regarding the national demonstration program, which I feel slightly alarming, which I will further emphasize on the aspect of when he writes in the background of national demonstration plan which was launched in 1967. Unless the scientists can demonstrate what they advocate, their advice may not be heeded. Since they have not had an opportunity to do this in past, we are initiating during this year National Agriculture Research and Developmental Year Program, an important part of which will be to study the country with excellent demonstration plots, showing the yield that can be easily obtained in all our major crops plan, providing available scientific know-how is put to use. These demonstrations will be laid out in farmers' field by the staff, students of our agriculture institutions and college. He further, in describing the aims of National Demonstration Program, he mentioned to provide an opportunity to scientists, students of agriculture institution to demonstrate convincingly that high-yielding levels can be reached in our major crops plant and by exploiting the results of research work carried out in the country. Demonstration should be such that the crop raised are the best at the farmer of the locality have so far seen. So the aim is not to just demonstrate, but to undo whatever best practices available up until now. This is so I'm saying I was with him when any scientist will feel that sense of accomplishment, but what he's suggesting regarding with the national demonstration programs is that there is a taking over the control over the farming and agricultural practices, and which you can see from one of those demonstrations were made in Delhi in 1967, where entire agricultural land of 5 Delhi blocks and Ajamgarh, Nangoi, Alipur was brought under the high-yielding variety wheat program, which almost accounts for 2,000 acres of land. If you remember the figure that I've shown in Sri Lankan, is exactly amount of land Sri Lanka. This is almost at that time it was close to almost. It was 19,000 actually. It was lesser than the total Sri Lankan cultivable land. In that, 5 varieties of high-yielding varieties were tested. They were tested for their fertilizer response. They were tested for the other input management processes, and by adopting chemical fertilizer, this marked as a departure from the traditional low input form of agriculture, farming, to more agrochemical regime of green revolution. They demonstrated to farmers how to use fertilizer, modern sowing methods, what are the other crop protection techniques, and which become a major site to persuade farmers to take part in green revolution. I'll read this letter from one of how high variety seeds become the symbols of modernity, and to initially in 1967-68, there was a program. If you want to want the seeds, you have to apply to ICAR, and then people have to run. So in 1967, Satyavrat Ghosh write to Swaminathan, "Dear Swaminathan, I have read your article titled Sharbati Sonora, Symbol of Age of Religion, in August issue of Indian Farming, which I subscribe. As I am trying to be a farmer on modern lines, I'm interested in trying the variety in my farms on small scale. Kindly therefore let me know where to apply for 5 to 10 kg of the seeds." My aim is to by this letter you can sense the power imbalance over the time it has created, and and how the high-yielding variety of seeds become the symbols of modernity, and to having access with to having access with them, and the farmer was trying to I have an intention to become a modern farmer, expressing himself as. So rearticulating the aspect of the statecraft in the process of domesticating the high yield variety of seeds, Indian state decided to adapt agricultural modernization. And in this process, seeds, irrigation, fertilizer become the tools for developmental governance. Will become the core tool for developmental governance. State's position itself as a custodian and distributor of the scientific progress. Using seeds, they become the material extensions for this developmental giving state this developmental legitimacy. In the process of successful adaptation of dwarf varieties, state has to make massive investment in terms of developing infrastructure for seed multiplication station, developing new irrigation facilities, creating subsidies for seeds and fertilizer, and extending these services for crop trials across the country in the form of demonstration and in terms of crop demonstration. In terms of governance structure, state adopted a data-driven planning and surveillance model in which ICAR and Ministry of Agriculture were introducing scientific surveys and yield monitoring tool to assess the performance of the crops. The crop cutting experiments and the area surveys were rendering this rural ecology and landscapes legible to the state, what James Scott called as high modernist rationality, where the state has the ambition to map, standardize, manage every complex reality, and the complex reality such as agrarian ecology. State organized the political economy state interferes with the political economy by controlling the input and the output of agricultural output. The state because they brought the regulation for certification and distribution of the seeds, which created a formal structure for seed distribution, and it further marginalized the informal and indigenous seed distribution practices. The policy of input subsidies and subsidies on the seeds and fertilizer coerce the farmers to take up green revolution or align with the state objectives. At the same time, through price control, the state controls the output. So in that sense, this kind of in that sense, the state creates a controlled agriculture economy where state is both a planner as well as the market actor. The state invokes legitimacy by being a crisis manager. It through Green Revolution, it averts major famines that bolsters state's image, state's legitimacy. In that sense, seeds become the political instrument, which once linked with the Cold War geopolitics are now linked to the national pride, food security, and sovereignty. Thank you. In terms of reflection, yeah. Thank you very much.
Just check. Initially, I was wondering, you talked about the national demonstration program. I don't know if this is there in this archive or other archives. Have you seen any pushback or any conversations that sort of question, because they talk about having to go into the fields to try and work with various farming communities to spread the word. Were there any conversations in the archives or elsewhere that discuss why have this, or has there been someone who have questioned why should this be happening in the first place? Just curious to know if this has come up. No, research or for that matter, if anyone's actually seen this kind of conversation in the archives.
You know, I'm not able to look at that part. But actually, I don't know how to say. I was actually looking more on the geopolitics part of it, like how the making of the state scientist part. I don't look at I look at the many of those archives, those documents where the national demonstration plan was mentioned, and but not the pushback part.
And I actually was looking for your kind of understanding of what agricultural modernization is as it emerged out of your archival read. Because there's no kind of, I was waiting to hear what your conceptual framing was in the way in which you were reading Swaminathan and his papers and his particular epistemic vantage point. What is the way in which he formulated agricultural modernity, right? And so that was one of my kind of questions for you, is that this presentation would benefit from some kind of conceptual framing there. It's also a little bit, not a little bit, quite ahistorical, in the sense that, the way in which, for example, your references to Punjab, this extensive work on the canal colonies, right? And the way in which modernity was brought by the British into Punjab and created it into the great whole of northern India. One of the things that I'm actually kind of curious about is in your readings is that a lot of the work on the Green Revolution tends to be quite ignorant of space and place, right? And the thing is, what you very nicely showed is that in the area proximate to Delhi, there was a huge investment. Similarly, right, there are certain pockets of northern India that at particular points in time, and it'd be interesting to actually develop that kind of chronology and that timeline that was selected for these kinds of experimentations. And I think, it would be good if you were still working with the material to try and understand how some of those geographies feature as are identified and feature as crucibles for these resolutions.
Thank you. Do I respond to this question? Yes. Okay. No, I'm saying, do I take a few or? There are many questions in one. One is about methodological framework. I think I look at only from the perspective of technological adaptations, like how the high-yielding varieties which are brought from Mexico but adapted in India. And I look at statecraft as I said, try to mention it in the talk, like to make the artifact work, to curate you're curating a reality around it. You're creating processes to make it work. So I'm saying that so this curation which is happening, it is the process of domestication or adaptation of the. So this is I say that is a larger framework looking from the adaptationist perspective, because a large amount of seeds were not developed in India. is basically borrowed. And if you look at that way, Sharbati Sonora is not very different from Sonora 64. If you even look at and later on some of the material get into some scientific controversies also, especially with Sharbati Sonora. So this is one part of the framework I'm looking at only from the perspective of adaptation. Other part is certain geographies. Yeah, certain geographies, because and this is also very when I started working on, because this is the first time I'm working on agriculture. I've never worked before. I'm not agricultural science. So when I started looking at some of the archival materials, that most of the breeding spaces are in Wellington. The multiplication centers. If you look at some of the correspondence, he will keep responding that no, we could not able to develop varieties, but nobody actually take those wheat varieties in southern part of the India. So so this was also when I start working on this with the archives, I was wondering why when you have multiplication center in your own backyard, why people not adapting to it. So there were some of, I would say, some of the cultural factor also. If you look at later readings of M.S. Swaminathan, where he was responding to 50 years of Green Revolution, he mentioned in that in terms of reception of this. And one thing I want to mention, we talk about Green Revolution very often. We took at this term as a Green Revolution, but for a very long time in India, this was only about the wheat revolution. Even 1968, the ticket which was released, it was called Wheat Revolution. So everything around this is about wheat. So culturally, I feel that this the only thing is that when you say that white is adopted, maybe because of the cultural practice of consuming wheat or because even after, I don't know if I am able to. That's my hunch.
My sense is that it would be good to actually look at some of the just cultivation histories
Sure.
of particular regions and see what we displaced.
Sure.
Because there is, and in fact, most of your gazetteers will provide you that information, even though you, of course, would benefit from activity against those gazetteers as well.
So we could.
Thank you, Abhinav. So to begin with, just to take ahead the conversation. In fact, wheat revolution is still the 1970s. In fact, even the statistical data will vouch for it. Gradually, did get into rice and then pulses, then milk eventually. So it is, yes, the initial aspect was wheat, and it continued for a very long time. But then, and in fact, even regions, if you see only the newer varieties, high-yielding varieties or modern varieties, however you want to term it, there is an expansion that starts happening at least in the late 1980s. It is only with the coming of the a different kind of an economic regime that we see suddenly state withdrawal happening. So and it will be very interesting to see how does the state gazettes look at it. So I have two questions. One was that one is just to know the span of the archival material here, which is something that I've been sort of wanting to do for a very long time, but I failed to do. So very good to see. So if you can give us a sense of the material that you have displayed, what is that you have sort of a metadata of kind of archival material that you have seen here and you have made use of, whether it is dealing with the geopolitics of Green Revolution, whether it is dealing with the the kind of communication, like the principal Dr. Mr. Ghosh writing to Swaminathan.
Yeah.
So that kind of if you can just lay out the ground, or maybe I was late by 5 minutes, maybe you did that.
No,
Usually how is the archive like? Okay, so that was one thing I was looking forward to. Second was also, when you look at the letter, and I've seen some of such letters, letters that are here it is the designation says principal, by the way, a principal who wants to be a farmer. But there are letters of actually farmers. We have seen it together. So there, while it is on one hand how you are portraying it, statecraft. At the same time, I also see that and we know of farmer families who started interacting with not just Swaminathan but IARI in general, writing to IARI saying that we need this kind of these many kilograms of this seed. So this is also, is this not asserting, I'm asking you, is this not also an instance of breaking away from the local hierarchies where you have direct access to? If they are writing, definitely there is literacy, there is some capacity in that farmer who is writing or whose family is writing. Nevertheless, they are writing directly dealing with the state, something that you would never see in a colonial state. So I would like your reflection on it.
Sure. This is
third question, sorry, is the lens of when you're talking of MSP, also PDS, maybe you like to add PDS and other policies which really is part of the food policy program, and that was, yes, that was how cropping patterns were changed. That is how new ways, new techniques, new methods were introduced. But in the post-90s or post-2000 era, which is known as the agrarian crisis, where withdrawal of state is the sort of has been the major crisis, and for which not just we as academics, but the farmers on the streets themselves have been sort of vouching for to bring the state back. Using that lens, how do you comment on it?
Sure. So 3 questions. Okay. The first is about the landscape of the revolution, how from wheat it ventured into different parts of it. I think if you look at this would be this is my reading of it, and I'm once again with a caveat, I'm not dealing with this for very long time. But my reading is that if you look at the trajectories of different crops, say wheat, rice, and clubbing it in that in a one way, I feel that would be a methodologically not right, because Swaminathan himself mentioned there's a paper in which he compares that what happened, what they did went well with wheat, then well with the rice, and he tried to juxtapose that the trajectory of wheat is different and the trajectory of rice is different in terms of when you say statecraft, how in wheat, how the technocrats were on the forefront in organizing the landscape, and in rice it was the other way around. So he tried to mention, he tried to juxtapose in that paper, and then I looked at some other crops also. Like if you look at millets, the Piva's work, and who was a millet, who was a head here, had a very different trajectory, and if you look at some of the work like in which wheat was able to pick up, actually some of the in that time. They tried with maize. They started with maize actually in 1957. Millets were almost there with very similar kind of, and if you look at the yield differences, it's not that much. I did not able to showcase some of the figures here because there's a lot actually. There's a huge archive. There's a huge archive for this, and one can do PhD on it. But yeah, so I'm saying what I mean to say here is that these are choices. They are made. I'm not saying it is not that you don't have choices at that time with different crops. It's just the wheat, how the locking up between Swaminathan collaborations and how that happened led to this kind of led to this kind of. The other part is the state withdrawal. What is the second part? The question was.
No, I was saying that about these letters.
Yeah, letters. Yeah. Thank you very much.
But if you can lay out the land of the archive, which would be a kind of
But that I think Venkat would be the better person to say to comment on that. I have not not fully worked. I would
Happy to just share a comment.
please.
There are some records from the 1930s which are imperial researches, which were largely inherited by, but they were in Swaminathan's office when he was the director, and the good fortune of this archive is that it has come all the way to that since. So those are there. Most of the records are 19, the records that you're referring to, the ones that those are late 1960s. It seems like that's what you were. The correspondence late 1960s correspondence. I don't know what else you're looking at, but it is NCBS archive, and one of the archivists is sitting there. But anyway, the archive is open, the whole catalog is accessible on the public. So I don't know which aspects we want to look at, but there is correspondence roughly from 1950s.
50s is majorly.
To 20. Yes. Sorry, I mean,
so yeah.
I realize you're not asking them to share that for the audience.
Yeah. So the question that you asked about the farm, how in this program, demonstration program, how you're breaking the barriers and able to talk to the state. You will look at, this is one of the plans when I was planning my, my talk and conversation in my initial days, just to look at that data, because that's a huge data. And that's so I have some sense of it. I feel that if you look at the profile of those people, not many of them are. Many of them are really, from way. So you look at, if you look at, they mention their land, holdings in some of them. Not many of the marginalized farmers. Yeah, and the other part is marginalized farmers are writing, but then they are writing through unions, and unions are writing for them. So you will. So I mentioned principle, but I understand what the question is about. But it seems like the people who can participate in that kind of scheme has a kind of a threshold. And if you look at the threshold, then it is about and state. I think I'm not saying. See, as a historian, I have a luxury to comment, but certain choices can be inevitable also, as we are facing kind of a main kind of condition. So what I'm more concerned with the democracy part of it, which I also mentioned in the last part in the reflection, that how can we have in a hyper technical space, even when the certain choices that are made today affects people in general, whether you are part of that kind of. So there's a one part is technical and one part is political. Very often the scientists work with one part. We very often forget the political aspect of it and how it's going to be sociologically, culturally affect. So that's the only part which I'm more concerned is like how these decisions eventually, I'll say, affect, or what is how to improve the democratic, how to improve or respond to the techno-scientific democracy aspect of these things. So, but in that sense, I don't think that the people who are marginalized really have much say. Yeah, but the other question that you have mentioned about the state, the withdrawal of the state. I don't know how to respond. Surely we are asking about state intervention, and especially for the price control, especially like we had a farmer demonstration two years back concerning the but I'm not sure that I am well versed to speak for. Anyone?
We're at time. If anybody has any question, otherwise we can continue this over the some questions outside. But it's but thanks again. Thanks Abhinav for being here. Thanks to all of you for joining us today, and see you outside. Thank you.
Thank you.